All right, so chapter one, you all, is EMS systems. Right here, I did just mark out a course description because we will talk about that kind of the introductory of this course as far as what's expected of you in the class and how you get your cert and that sort of thing. And this is kind of laid out to follow your textbook as it goes. I don't really like the way it's laid out. I personally would start down here with the history of EMS, but your textbook kind of starts up here talking about certification, licensing, credentialing, and then talks about the difference in certifications before we dive into history. So we'll kind of go over some of this. As far as certifications up here, a certification just means that you have taken a class and you have passed a test. That doesn't mean you're allowed to practice anywhere. It doesn't mean that you have the ability to do any kind of medicine in any state. As far as a license go, licenses are given out by the states. So each state oversees EMS, and once you pass your test and get your certification, you can apply to the state to get your license. I know this sounds like a lot, but it's really not a lot. Once you get your state license, and whoever you're going to work for does credentialing. So this is all just kind of accountability to make sure that you have taken a class and you've passed a test and it's all kind of standardized. We'll talk about this a little bit later as we move into the 1990s EMS agenda of the future and how these kind of different things came about over time. So we'll touch back on this a little bit later. And as far as certifications, you all know this AEMT certification. You have to have your EMT certification prior to taking this course in the state of Colorado. And you have to maintain your EMT certification until you get your AEMT certification. So if any of y'all are expiring this March, let's make sure we renew those EMTs so that you don't lapse over on that. Your AEMT certification is good for 2 years, kind of like your EMT. There's a certain amount of continuing education you have to get every 2 years. It's on National Registry's website. I believe it is 50 credit hours every 2 years, so 10 more than the EMT. As far as coming down here to different levels, you all probably this should be a review from EMT class. EMR is kind of the lower level, and your book talks about EMRs as being like police officers, firefighters, ski patrollers, first responders in that avenue. What I've seen EMRs over my time has been more geared towards like ambulance drivers, like private companies will certify people as EMRs to have them drive the ambulance, but they're not really like primary patient care givers. Your book has a list. I put up there table 1.2 in your book. Has a list of skills that EMRs can do, the EMTs can do, AEMTs and medics. You should be kind of familiar with that, although your textbook really doesn't align with what's currently out there in the field. It has a few little mishaps in it there. For you all in Colorado, the way this kind of works is the AEMT course is essentially you can do everything you could do as an EMT. You add the skills of an IV EMT, and then you all will be able to get fentanyl, first aid, Benadryl, and I'm missing one. Oh yeah, and IVs in the jugular vein. So these are kind of the skills that you get above an EMT for an EMT in the state of Colorado. We'll talk about why it's different state to state here in a little bit. So EMT is about 150 hours required. AEMT is 240 hours required. And then if you jump up to paramedic, this is at least a 2-year kind of program. In the state of Colorado now, this is mandated to be at least associate's degree or a bachelor's degree. So, okay. And you have to be an EMT or an AEMT to be able to take your paramedic course. Okay, are you ready to dive into the history? We're going to dive into the history of EMS, and this is a little different than your textbook. I think a lot of this is really important, and some of it's just kind of fun to learn. It's kind of fun to learn like where we came from, where we're going, how we got there, and that sort of stuff. So back here, I got to start back in the 15th century, and this was some physicians in Iran that started developing some kind of standardized program for like CPR. This was the first like written down documentation we have of resuscitation in the world actually. And then we jump up to like 1767, when we had a group of physicians in Amsterdam that firmly established so-called protocols for resuscitation. And a lot of it's not too different than what we do today, to be honest with you. I can't remember all of them, but like they warmed the patient up, it was clearing the airway, it was open the airway. They actually used like smoke to put tobacco smoke up people's rectum for stimulation. Not a whole lot different than giving people epi as far as a stimulant getting into the body. But anyway, this was like kind of the beginnings of like a really set protocols for resuscitation. Over the next 100 years or so, there's a lot of, by the way, they claim they saved like 150, 200 lives with this protocol. Don't know if they really did. But this stimulated a lot of people in Europe to start trying different methods of resuscitation and CPR. So this is kind of the beginnings of all that. I put in 1997, Larry's Flying Ambulance. You'll see this maybe in some history books. What this was the Revolutionary War. Dr. Larry developed a wagon essentially pulled by a horse, and it was a way to pick up soldiers on the battlefield and drop them back off at treatment tent. Not a whole lot different what we do today. But anyway, this is some of our first documentation, something similar to an ambulance. I didn't put this in here, but as we move into the Civil War, there's some tents where they used the same thing, a horse-drawn wagon, and they had an entryway and an exitway in a tent. Much like a trauma bag nowadays, they would bring in patients on the wagon, and then they'd unload them, drop them off in a medical tent, and drive back out the other side. I didn't put this on here. As far as in the civilian world, as y'all are starting to catch on a little bit here too, you'll see World War I, World War II. We get a lot of our medicine from wars because a lot of people get hurt in wars. But moving in right here in 1861, we saw our first like civilian ambulance. This was actually in Cincinnati, Ohio. Back then they used horse-drawn carriages, and they have physicians that were on the ambulance. They would go to the streets, they would go to people's homes, like treat people at their house, not bringing everybody into the hospital. And this kind of ties into the way we're moving to the future here too with the EMS agenda for 2050. So like we're kind of coming full circle with this. But anyway, this is our first kind of civilian ambulance. Bellevue Hospital, New York, had something similar that started around this time frame in 1861 range. But anyway, we're kind of jumping up the timeline here. I put World War I in here because there's a lot of people getting hurt, and so there's a lot of medicine that's starting to get developed. And then World War II, we saw kind of our first transport of people going by air. I do have some photos. This isn't a PowerPoint presentation, but there's some photos out there in the History of EMS Museum that has someone getting put in the side of an airplane and getting closed up when they're in this little stretcher. Personally, I think I'd rather stay on the battlefield and just take my chances rather than go in that airplane closed in a box. But anyway, this was kind of the first air transport. And then jumping up here, I put this in a timeline because it makes sense to me, so I hope it helps you all. It is obviously not equal across the bottom, but it is in order. So American Red Cross, they adopted CPR in the 50s. There's quite a bit that happened in the 50s. If y'all are interested, there is a podcast out there about Freedom House Ambulance. It is on the podcast called Criminal. You can look up Criminal and Freedom House Ambulance online. It should take you to a really good podcast that talks about this doc named Peter Saffer. Peter Saffer is really instrumental in starting EMS as it is today. It's not talked about at all in your textbooks. But back in the 50s, he was a anesthesiologist in Philadelphia, and he had some events that took place. A very prominent politician died in the middle of a speech, and the lack thereof care, getting to the hospital and getting to Peter caused this guy to suffer lifelong deficits. So Peter decided there was a better way of doing this, and it wasn't too long after that his son died of an asthma attack. Showed up in his ER, worked his son ended up dying, and it kind of stimulated him to like really move this needle forward. So back then he decided you can see a lot kind of happen here in the 60s. When I talk about the pulse of life, this is a video that you can look up on YouTube. This is Peter Saffer. He did this. He did this video, Pulse of Life. It aired worldwide. And after this is where our modern day ABCs and CPR came from. It came from his video and his training, The Pulse of Life. American Heart Association officially adopted this shortly thereafter. So kind of moving up through this time frame, Peter Saffer is really instrumental in medicine. And then in 1966 here, this is where your textbooks kind of jump in. They talk about the neglected disease of modern society. As an article is published, people call it the white paper. Don't exactly know why, but this is where, like most textbooks say, that our modern day EMS started was 1966. When this got published, it kind of drew attention that we had automobiles on the streets, and we were having a lot of car accidents, and we really didn't have a method set up to get the people off the streets and get them to the hospital to definitive care. So this article kind of brought this to light. Shortly after this, the Department of Transportation took over. This was all geared towards highways, so as you look at the textbook, it's all kind of geared towards working on the streets, ambulances, cars, highways, and that sort of stuff. And this is why, because we're overseen by the DOT. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration falls underneath of the DOT. So really who governs us at a national level, it's going to be the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. That's a mouthful. That's a mouthful right there. But anyway, this all kind of happened around 1966, and Freedom House Ambulance, around this time, it was when Peter Saffer's son died, and he had the plan that we could do better in our society. So he wanted to start an ambulance service, and his kind of outlook on this was he could take anybody off the streets and he could train them to become life-saving individuals on the streets, and not just pick them up from one place and transport them to the hospital, which we've been doing for decades, right? So policemen, firefighters, coroners, whoever's out there as a public servant would just put people in the back of a car and drive them. He's like, we can do better. We can provide care on scene, and I can train anybody to do this. So what he did at the time was he took a group of people outside of Philadelphia, kind of the projects, and they were an all black ambulance service. So everybody that he trained was an African American. He took them in the hospital, he put them through a 6-month intensive program. They were in the OR, they were in the OB, they were in the ED, all throughout the hospital, getting trained up on medicine. And then he put them out on the Freedom House ambulance, and they started delivering care to that area, which was all kind of the poverty area of Philadelphia. And as time kind of went on, years went by, and there was a little bit of battle because of the poor people were getting better care, and then the poor people was getting better care than the wealthier people. And anyway, as time kind of went on, they realized like this group of people that Peter Saffer trained was doing a really good job and doing way better than other agencies, other places across the country. And so it wasn't too far after this, Peter Saffer kind of stepped out of the realm, and don't quote me on this, I think it was Nancy Caroline that took over. She was, I can't remember her, what else she was in charge of at the time, but she kind of took over what he started, and she gets a lot of the credit as the beginning of founding EMS, modern day EMS. But this is kind of how it first started. I encourage y'all to read back in this little history a little bit, because it really is phenomenal. After like the country took over, they formalized the test, and a lot of these original paramedics that started at Freedom House were not intelligent enough to read the test, and ended up losing their jobs, which is kind of sad. But anyway, jumping forward to where it's important for you all, in 1971, you all, the first EMT textbook was printed, and here it is. This took me years to acquire. Actually, one of my friends that works ski patrol, this is his book from the 70s. But you can tell this book, which is equal to a paramedic book, is a lot smaller. It's still a really good textbook. But yeah, this is one of my little gems. I'm happy to have acquired that book. But this was published in 1971. So we had our first like standardized curriculum in 1971. From here, kind of moving forward, you see a big blank space. That's because there's not any like really big documented things that happen nationwide. Now, through this area here, we saw a lot of things happen at state levels, at regional levels. First paramedic program developed in the 70s and the 80s. There's like a whole hodgepodge of like things paramedics were allowed to do, things EMTs were allowed to do. Some states had 8, 9, 10. I think Texas had 16 different certifications for EMTs when I first started. So we had a lot of states doing a lot of different stuff, and didn't seem like a set standard of care, so to say, which we'll learn about later. So as we kind of come through all this in the 1990s, you can see the EMS agenda for the future over here. This was kind of whenever this was done by the, where was it? The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration developed the EMS agenda for the future. And this was in the 90s, this was all geared towards like, we need to standardize the program. Like if you're an EMT in Colorado, you should be trained to the same level as an EMT in Wyoming or Alaska or Florida or Hawaii or wherever. So, and if you're a paramedic, you should have the same kind of training across state to state. So that was the big push from this. You can look this up, and there's definitely bullet points of other things. It was like the big focus for the EMS agenda of the future. But that was kind of the overall goal, is to make things standardized. So, as this kind of came about, National Registry, I'm not sure when National Registry started. It is not a government agency, it's a nonprofit agency, but it seems to be the industry standard. So moving on up this timeline, this is very recent. This is 2019, the EMS agenda for 2050. Wow, 30 years leap. That's looking way into the future. This is on page 13, kind of highlights some of this. And a lot of this 2019 EMS agenda for 2050 is about us having more collaboration and work in the community and with the hospitals. So becoming part of a bigger healthcare system is kind of what this is about. So I encourage y'all to kind of look that up, because if you're taking this class, you're probably kind of new to EMS, and this is going to be your future. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get over here some. All right, pause this anytime, look stuff up. Your big takeaway from right here, as far as like test purposes, is going to be your 1966, The Neglected Disease of Modern Society, quote unquote, the white paper, and then your first textbook, 1971. All this Freedom House ambulance stuff is not in your book, or the Pulse of Life is not either. I don't think you're gonna see this stuff on a test either. As far as certification, licensing, credentials, probably not gonna see this on an exam either, because this varies a lot from state to state on how you do this. What you will probably see is the difference between EMR, EMT, AEMT, paramedic, which is on table 1.2. So be familiar with this on test. Okay, we're gonna keep moving.